picture this. It is a sweltering summer night in 1568, somewhere inside the shadowed towers of the Spanish royal palace. The air is thick with the stench of decay and neglect, carrying the faint metallic tang of old blood and sweat. Moonlight struggles through barred windows, casting jagged patterns on the cold stone floors, and the silence is punctuated only by the distant clatter of armor and the muffled cries of a boy no older than 23. In a small, dimly lit chamber lies a young prince. His body is twisted from generations of inbreeding, his left leg shorter than the right, his chest sunken, his skull misshapen. Once heir to the greatest empire on earth, he now drags himself across the floor, muscles atrophied, skin weeping from sores, and mind unraveling under the weight of isolation. This is Don Carlos of Spain, son of Philip II, a boy trapped by the very blood that was meant to secure his future. But tonight, he is more than just imprisoned. He is deliberately left to rot, watched over by guards who obey the orders of a father who has abandoned his love for duty. Months of starvation, ice baths in the scorching heat, and psychological torment have transformed him into a shadow of the man he should have become. The silence around him is a weapon, the very air a prison, as his father's empire watches, untouchable, while the heir's life decays in front of them. A prince betrayed, by blood, by empire, by his own father. Before we can understand this night, before we can see how Don Carlos ended up dying, not in battle, not on a battlefield, but in the cruelest, slowest of imprisonments, we must step back. We must trace the path of a boy born into power but trapped by lineage, privilege, and a father's unflinching sense of duty, to see how a life of promise became one of humiliation, decay, and ultimate tragedy. You are there in the sweltering palace of Madrid in 1545, feeling the damp heat pressing against your skin. The courtiers are murmuring in excitement over the birth of an heir, but in the corner, royal physicians exchange grim looks. This child is Prince Don Carlos, son of Philip II and Maria Manuela of Portugal. But his birth is more than celebration, it is a warning. Carlos is the product of relentless inbreeding. 6 of his 8 great-great-grandparents were the same, repeated unions meant to preserve purity of the Habsburg line. What should have been a miracle is already a curse coded into his very cells. When he cries, it is weak. His head is misshapen. His mother dies 4 days later, fever consuming her youthful body. She was barely 17, and Carlos barely sees her face before she is gone. The wet nurses whisper of odd behaviors, and court physicians prescribe treatments that seem cruel even by the standards of the 16th century. Mercury baths, forced postures, bleeding to balance humors. Each intervention punishes him for his own existence. You can feel the weight of inevitability pressing down. From the moment of his birth, Carlos is trapped in a prison of inherited tragedy. You follow Carlos into adolescence, and his body betrays him at every step. His left leg is shorter than the right. His chest is sunken, ribs compressed against fragile lungs. The Milan steel armor cannot fit him. Each attempt to force him into the mold of a perfect prince is met with the sound of metal grinding against bone and his quiet, fury-filled screams. The deformities are visible, but the invisible ones, pain, anger, frustration, are worse. Every portrait must hide his twisted features. Court physicians invent excuses, misaligned humors, unlucky stars. But you, watching from the shadows, understand the truth. A dynasty's obsession with blood purity has produced a prince who is a living warning. His intelligence is sharp, but his mind is haunted by physical pain. He lashes out at servants, tests boundaries, and cultivates cruelty with alarming cunning. You can sense the tension in the corridors. Everyone flees when his footsteps echo, for they know that any misstep could bring his wrath. Imagine standing there, watching the moment your promised future is stolen. That is Carlos at 14. He had been promised Elizabeth of Valois as a bride, a union meant to cement alliances and secure his lineage. But Philip II, recently widowed and politically calculating, marries her himself. The betrayal is more than political, it is deeply personal. Carlos watches the ceremony, helpless, while his father takes what should have been his. Elizabeth is kind to him, perhaps out of pity, but every smile cuts deeper. You feel the growing obsession, the psychological spiral. Dead birds arranged outside her chambers, defaced portraits, obsessive surveillance, all speak to the brewing storm in a young, twisted mind. At a masked court dance, he approaches Elizabeth, whispers that send her face pale. Guards must intervene. You realize that the humiliation, the isolation, the cruel removal of his promised life has transformed Carlos from a troubled prince into a dangerous, uncontainable force. You see it, the prince's cruelty escalating into pure menace. He holds knives to ambassadors' throats, burns animals alive for observation, forces shoemakers to eat their own creations. Each act is calculated, intelligent, and terrifying. His father, Philip, watches from the shadows, trying everything, priests, tutors, routines, but nothing tames him. The prince is a storm that cannot be contained. His intelligence sharpens his paranoia. Every servant, every whisper, every glance becomes part of a web of suspicion and potential rebellion. And you understand, the danger is not only to the empire but to the family. The heir to Spain's throne is preparing his own coup in his fevered imagination, plotting with enemies, testing loyalty, and speaking openly about removing the unfit king, his own father. January 18, 1568. You are in the shadowed palace corridor as Philip dons his full armor, not to fight a foreign enemy, but to confront his own son. A physician leans near the locked door and hears Carlos mumbling, "I am rotting and they are letting me rot." For 6 months, the prince is left in a tower. His muscles atrophy, sores fester, his mind dissolves into hallucinations. He holds counsel with invisible visitors, pleads with ghosts, talks to dead ancestors. Ice baths in the summer heat, refusal to bathe, constant paranoia. The empire watches as the boy decays. You feel the silence as the cruelest instrument of all. The father, the king, permits the decay, controlling the empire while his son's life is silently destroyed. Every report Philip reads confirms the prince's decline, and he allows it to continue. Duty has triumphed over love. On July 24, 1568, the servants find Carlos unconscious in a pool of ice water. He drifts between life and death, mumbling in tongues he never learned, calling to people long dead. Then, in a fleeting moment of lucidity, he speaks to his father. "Tell my father I forgive him." Hours later, he dies at 23. The court records call it natural illness. Portraits, letters, and memories are destroyed. His very existence is erased, even as Philip's empire stands unshaken. You feel the hollowness. The prince's life, full of potential and suffering, has been silently rewritten by history. You sit with the weight of this tragedy. Carlos's suffering was not random. It was the product of ambition, pride, and the ruthless calculus of monarchy. A son's life sacrificed to preserve a father's power. His genius, cruelty, and tragedy remind you of the cost of dynastic obsession. Even the acts of erasure, burning letters, destroying portraits, cannot fully hide the horror. There is a lesson in his torment. Unchecked ambition and adherence to duty over love can create monsters, and even blood cannot shield innocence from political necessity. The story of Don Carlos did not vanish. Artists, playwrights, and composers reshaped him into a romantic martyr, a tragic lover, a symbol of idealism crushed by tyranny. Schiller's play and Verdi's opera immortalized him, transforming the real, tormented prince into fiction. Yet the truth persists in the shadows of history, a boy, heir to a mighty empire, confined and decayed by the very blood that should have ensured his greatness. You can feel the echo in the corridors of power today, where dynastic obsession, family ambition, and political calculation still create tragedies unseen by the public. Even now, when you hear the tales of royalty and power, Don Carlos's life lingers, a cautionary reminder that history often forgives the powerful and forgets the innocent. His body was silenced, but his story continues to haunt us, a dark whisper from the past, echoing the cost of duty over humanity.